Hey, good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up here at 5:30, we'll talk to Matthew Foldi. He's been covering all of the developments on Capitol Hill today as the Chinese Communist Party uses its TikTok app to get America's children to call and threaten members of Congress. It's a wild story. Matthew Foldi will give us the latest. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. My guess is you probably don't watch MSNBC much, but this is the type of commentary they have.
I mean, if you look at some of these exit polls, I mean, I live in Virginia. Immigration was the number one issue. I mean, again, these could change in Virginia.
Well, Virginia does have a border with West Virginia. Very, very contested area.
Build a wall. Like, what?
Oh, hilarious. Why are Virginians so concerned about immigration? A number one issue, according to exit polls this week. Let's ask the Attorney General of Virginia. Jason Miyares joins us now. Sir, good to have you with us. Thank you.
Yeah, great to be with you, Vince. And I thought that clip that was sent to me on election night, I thought it just perfectly encapsulated how out of touch so many in the legacy media, particularly at MSNBC, are. You know, border security is not the number one issue just among Virginia Republican primary voters. It's the number one issue among all voters if you look at the national polling, because it has reached a crisis level. And I thought it was an irony that Jen Psaki, who lives in Virginia, was making these comments, clearly oblivious to the fact that just the week before, she laughingly mocked her fellow Virginians. There had a illegal immigrant from Venezuela that had been apprehended in September of last year, had been released, and then is charged with sexually assaulting a minor child in Campbell County, Virginia. And whether it's this or with what happened with Lincoln Riley, we just had it broke that a 15-year-old girl that had been abducted in Ohio was found in Bedford County, Virginia. And all of these are preventable crimes. All of these are crimes that were conducted by individuals that in many cases were stopped at the border, or we were aware they were here. They were basically part of this Biden administration catch and release program. They got released. And so Virginians are tired of it. All Americans are tired of it. It's why this is the number one issue, I think, that's going to be relevant this fall. And it just shows how out of touch, not that this surprises anybody, but how out of touch so many of these elitists that are commenting on MSNBC have shown themselves to be.
Yeah, and this is, of course, years in the making. We see crimes committed at the hands of illegal immigrants, all of which would be preventable if we secured our border. I mean, even the sort of the MS-13 gangsters that we see inside of some of Virginia's high schools, it's out of control, and it's really scaring the families, the voters of Virginia, and they'd like to see some change here.
Listen, this is in the Latino community. I had a desire to do in Northern Virginia a gang awareness, gang prevention town hall about this issue, about public safety, and at a local Latino church. And candidly, tragically, the pastor confidentially said he did not feel safe being out in front in this issue. He encouraged me to continue to speak out, but that is so often the case. We hear this word privilege. Privilege are people that vote for policies and they never have to deal with the ramifications of that. And so when you allow this influx as well, there are people that will prey on fellow individuals, including fellow migrants in the community. The average going rate that the Sinaloa cartel, which in my opinion, the Sinaloa cartel is the most dangerous criminal enterprise on the planet. They make the Italian mafia look like the boys, charging on average about $15,000 to sneak somebody over the border. And what happens is they oftentimes will then never forgive, quote unquote, the debt. You have to work it off either through labor trafficking or through sex trafficking. And so what's happening at our border is like anything I've ever seen. To put things in context for your listeners, during the Obama administration, Obama's Homeland Security Director said that a daily crossing of about 1,000 to 1,500 a day, or about 30,000 a month, was referred to as a crisis level of illegal immigration into our country. That's 30,000 was a crisis level. In December, it was 300,000. It's hundreds of thousands each month. That is what's happening. We've had enough illegal crossings since Joe Biden has been taken president 7 million. That is larger than 32 states. That's larger than the population of 32 American states. It has reached crisis level. It is why it is the number one issue on voters' minds because of all of that's coming with it. And they're very, very concerned about what they're seeing. And these headlines are seeing not just here, but they're seeing it in New York and other cities as well.
I mean, is it possible for us to get our arms around how substantial the human trafficking is in the United States right now?
Well, look at it this way. The largest criminal enterprise on a global scale is drug trafficking. The second largest criminal enterprise on a global scale is human trafficking. It's $150 billion a year. I know from both interviews of cartel members, people that have cooperated with law enforcement, and they're very open to the fact that what they have realized is that they can, if they have a fentanyl pill or heroin or pick your drug of choice, they sell it and it's gone and they have to manufacture more. But if they're trafficking in a human being, that is residual income they can get over and over again. It's evil. I mean, you hear the way to describe a fellow human being, somebody that has infinite value because they're made in the image of their creator, as just something to exploit over and over again, either for their labor or for their sex. And it is a different life type of evil. So getting our arms around it is hard because it is one of the most underreported of crimes. Victims will be exploited. They'll escape. The last thing they want to do is to testify. It's something that this governor has been passionate about. He put together in Virginia the first witness protection initiative in Virginia for victims, whether it's human trafficking or other crimes that feel unsafe, to get them out of town. Modeled very similarly to what we have at the federal level. But we were just running the fact that people don't want to testify. And as a former prosecutor, I could tell you, somebody's not willing to testify, you don't have a case. You can't move forward. The case tends to collapse. So it is not an insignificant problem. It is a huge problem that we're facing right now. And it's something that we're gravely concerned that now the cartels, with all of their powers and resources, have discovered another revenue stream. And tragically, it's the trafficking in fellow human beings.
Now, I assume, of course, this all is yet one more reason why you just announced in the last 24 hours that you are officially endorsing Donald Trump for president of the United States in 2024. Tell us what led you to this decision. Not every Virginia official is making a public endorsement. Why did you?
Well, listen, I mean, I thought from the beginning that the last thing Republican primary voters needed was another elected official to weigh in and tell them who they should or shouldn't vote for. I trust them in the process. And Donald Trump won big in Virginia on Super Tuesday night. But I think this is a clear binary choice. And for me, this is a public safety issue. I'm in a unique position as Attorney General of the amount of information and report that comes across my desk from both federal and state and local law enforcement. And to me, it is as grave as I've ever been concerned about the safety and security of our country. We've apprehended over 200 members on the terrorist watch list at our border. And that's who we've apprehended. If you want to get an idea of who's gotten through, you probably need to multiply that number by 4 or 5. And enough fentanyl is crossing our southern border to kill every man, woman, and child in America 3 times over.
Yes.
The reality is Joe Biden, if he announced tonight, he won't, that he was just going to return back to the return of Mexico policy, that alone, he has power right now through an executive order to put a variety of different policies in place to secure the border. But right now, it is an unmitigated disaster. It is as concerning as anything I've done. He's failed to protect our southern border. He's failed to protect Americans. And every state now is a border state.
Yes.
And though the MSNBC may not believe it, that's the reality. Not even taking the fact that how it has taxed our resources. And what frustrates me is we are fundamentally a generous country. I'm obviously a product of immigration legally, and there is a huge world of difference between an individual that has to go through the process, the background check. They swear an oath of allegiance to this country, an oath of allegiance they're willing to serve in the military if called upon, versus somebody who cuts some line. And to put things in perspective, over 80% of who we apprehend, quote unquote, apprehend at the border, they essentially get a piece of paper. It's like a parking ticket. It's like a traffic ticket. It says, we'll see you in court in 2028 or 2029. They get a court date 4 or 5 years from now, and over 90% of them never even show up. We never even know. And it is why you have the former FBI director writing a letter to Congress saying we're having tens of thousands of military-age men coming from countries, some of which don't like us. By the way, it's not just Central or South America. It's China consistently is a top 5 on the number of illegals crossing our border are from China. And so we don't even know exactly who is here. It is a national security crisis unlike anything I've ever seen. That makes, in my opinion, that makes this election is a clear contrast between President Trump, who wants to secure the border, and President Biden, who supports a catch and release open border policy.
So in that presidential election, it's been now 20 years since a Republican has been able to capture Virginia in the presidential election. That was George W. Bush back in 2004. I spoke to President Trump on Monday about this, and he said in our interview that he very much wants to make a big play for Virginia this year. Latest polling has him just 4 points back on Joe Biden here. In other words, it's an actual contest for the Commonwealth. Should he begin campaigning in the state with an effort to win it, would you be willing to campaign with him, given that you've just endorsed him?
Well, I mean, listen, I think when it comes to campaigning, the one thing I've realized as a candidate myself is there's actually 2 things you never have enough of: time and money. And they have to know what their internal polls. I like to joke, only trust a poll that you pay for. And so they're going to have to make the determination whether Virginia is indeed, it was not targeted in 2020. To the best of my knowledge, he never made an appearance. I think he made a few in 2016. But I'm always happy to highlight his record on particularly border security and protecting America, not even counting the fact his record on cutting taxes and increasing our national defense versus Joe Biden's failed policy. I'm always happy to highlight that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll see what happens again on what kind of resources he commits to Virginia. Obviously, he was here this past Saturday in Richmond. He wasn't joined by any statewide officials. That includes, of course, you. But normally we would expect, say, the governor to be there. Governor Youngkin wasn't. Although I did notice that Governor Youngkin came out and endorsed Trump right after your endorsement yesterday. What role do you think your endorsement had in getting the governor to say the same thing?
Listen, the governor is his own man. I respect him enormously. I think Governor Youngkin is one of the best governors in the country. I think he is both an extraordinary leader and he's a dear, dear friend. So I can't speak to his thinking. I'm sure that his thinking is similar to mine, which is we got, now it's time to go win. And, we have a primary process. It worked by design. It was a spirited, robust debate. Unlike in the Democratic side, where essentially Joe Biden is, and I thought that was one of the most telling moments. The 2 most telling moments I thought on election night actually was the clip from MSNBC that you referenced, but also the fact that even though Joe Biden, had on paper a good night, quote unquote, by winning and rollicking the victories in these Democratic primaries, he wasn't willing to go on camera and address the American people. He wasn't willing to do the famous Super Bowl interview, which most presidents will always be interviewed right before the Super Bowl to a large audience. He seems to be, at a time when everybody's raising questions about his mental acumen, he wasn't willing to go on camera, even if it's just to cheer and say, thank you for your faith in me. I thought that was a telling moment. We'll obviously watch the State of the Union tonight, what happens. But I don't understand this idea that they could try to hide Joe Biden from the general public and think that's going to lower the number of questions people are having about his fitness for office right now. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how much the media is willing to ask hard questions.
Yeah,
for
definitely.
the longest time, and it was obvious to the rest of us, they weren't even willing to ask the most basic questions. They would say if you would challenge whether Joe Biden was mentally fit and his age was an issue, they'd say that was ageism. But when you look at, again, the American people are not fools. I just put a lot of trust in them. This is an issue where it's a majority of Democrats think he's too old, and I think it's approaching 70% of Americans think they have questions about whether his age is now a factor in his ability to perform his basic duties as president of the United States. I thought that was a telling moment. He hid himself from the cameras on a night where he should have been celebrating.
All right. That's the Attorney General of Virginia, Jason Miyares. Sir, thank you very much for your time. We're up against the break here. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yeah, we just ran up against the clock there. But, Winsome Sears, that was going to be my next question. But there's only so much the Attorney General could say about that. You got to ask her. That's what his answer would have been. Why she hasn't yet endorsed Trump. But that question, I did have a question about human trafficking. I don't know what the numbers are yet. It's probably impossible for us to pin down what the true numbers are under Biden, but how many hundreds of thousands of people have been human trafficked into the United States under Joe Biden for the purposes of sex or slavery or sexual slavery or labor slavery? How much of that has happened under Biden? It's probably worth getting our arms around the answer to that question. I see over at the Babylon Bee today, the managing editor of that website, Joel Berry, not tweeting a joke, straight up just tweeting a fact here. He said by the end of his term, Biden will have brought in more trafficked children than the number of slaves shipped to North America over 200 years of the slave trade. Is that possible? I mean, the data on that over a 200-year time frame. You know the guy who sits and does he talks to lefties. He'll sit down of all sorts of people and he'll go through their ancestors and he'll figure out where they came from and if their ancestors owned slaves. Remember that? And it was Sunny Hostin recently of The View. She found out that her ancestors were slaveholders and her whole world was shattered by this. His name is Henry Louis Gates Jr. He did a study of this once, and he said that between 1525 and 1866, the entire history of the slave trade, there were many millions of Africans who were enslaved and brought to what they broadly called the New World and survived the Middle Passage. And among the 10.7 million Africans who were sent to North America, only 388,000 total were shipped to North America. 388,000 total over those 200 years. So compare that number to the human trafficking going on under Biden right now. My guess is it's probably true. We probably do have more slaves who have been brought into the United States by the cartels under Biden in just 3 years, perhaps by the end of his presidency, than the entirety of the transatlantic slave trade. That's jaw-dropping. It's a bad number. Hey, coming up, we're going to talk to Matthew Foldi, who's a political reporter who's been following the chaos on Capitol Hill today. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to save their control of TikTok today, and they're enlisting American 12-year-olds to call their members of Congress. It's a bizarro story. Matthew Foldi covering the details ahead. Hey, good afternoon to you. 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. No country is working harder to rot your child's brain than the communists who run China. And they're doing it by way of an app called TikTok. I think it's the most popular social media app on the planet right now. And boy, the Chinese are exerting a lot of control over the dialogue among young people here in the United States here. And so Congress today debating some legislation to force China to divest from TikTok. You want TikTok to stick around? Fine. Let an American company own it. The Chinese communists, not so much. In fact, there's some bipartisan support for this, which is good news. But TikTok is fighting back today, and it's leading to some very bizarre phone calls on Capitol Hill. For more on this, I want to bring in Matt Foldi, a political reporter for The Spectator, who joins us now. Matthew, sir, good to have you back.
Hey, weird reason to be back, but glad to be here with you again.
It is bizarre. Okay, so give us just the framework here of what Congress is contemplating doing and how TikTok is fighting back.
So I think we all know that China uses slave labor in its own borders. But the weird thing today is that we've seen they have been amassing, in essence, a child slave army in the United States. And like you were saying, TikTok it's a video sharing platform. But the problem is what is unique to TikTok, which is banned in China, by the way, ironically enough, is that it is dominated. It is controlled, as is any allegedly private company in China, by the Chinese Communist Party. And there were efforts earlier this year to outright ban TikTok that failed because Democrats will all compromise national security to keep the TikTok dopamine flowing to young kids in America. Let's remember Biden's own national security apparatus has called TikTok a national security threat. Did that stop Biden's campaign from joining TikTok? No, it did not. So what happened today? There's basically an army of child soldiers because every time you log into TikTok today, you are prompted with a notification saying that America is trying to ban TikTok. Call your representative today. You enter in your zip code, and then it routes you to call Congress. Two things in particular are incredibly concerning that we've seen from this. The first is there's been a massive amount of kids calling their member of Congress, threatening to kill themselves if TikTok is banned, okay? The second thing that's, as if that wasn't concerning enough, even more concerning, is at least two different House offices have both told me that there have been death and assassination threats of the member of Congress if a vote on this bill, that basically this bill only would require the removal of TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, which is run top to bottom by the Chinese Communist Party. That's insane.
Yeah, it's all insane. So TikTok is using its platform to force a political outcome by enlisting children to threaten either members of Congress or threaten self-harm in order to achieve that outcome. And we're supposed to say, okay, yeah, the app is fine. Like it should say the status quo should hold.
No, I will clarify. TikTok is not saying threaten to kill yourself, but the warped hold that this app, almost particularly because of the way it's been constructed by our adversaries, has on kids is such that when they're calling their representative, they're threatening suicide.
I've heard that the age of some of these kids is like 10, 12 years old. Is that true?
Yeah, little children. You would think it's a Thursday. They should have been in school today, so maybe at lunchtime they're calling their congressman. But the thing is, I can't think of a better way to prove TikTok's critics right than this bizarre child soldier lobbying campaign that we saw happen today.
And they're using disinformation. They're using disinformation to convince the kids to make these calls too. So they're saying, "Oh, Congress is trying to ban us right now." And as you and I have both emphasized, that's not actually true. That's a lie. Congress is trying to force a divestiture.
That's exactly right. This is a different proposal than what has happened in the past. And let's not, let's be clear. Obviously, TikTok's CEO has lied to Congress countless times when he's been in here under oath about Chinese infiltration and domination of this app. So if they're willing to lie under oath to Congress, which the Biden Department of Justice has had this referred to them and done absolutely nothing, but if they're willing to lie to Congress under oath, do you think that they really care that kids are being fed misinformation right now by the app? I mean, again, TikTok is banned in China. They have a domestic version called Douyin where kids, instead of being fed eating disorder content, which they get on TikTok, they get calculus and biology and Chinese history content. If TikTok is banned in China, it probably should be banned in the United States, but this isn't even a ban. This is simply to say, hello, foreign adversary countries like China and Russia and Iran cannot control and own technology like TikTok if it's operating in the United States.
Well, exactly. And this is not a private company. It's not a privately controlled company. It's a government-controlled company by our leading adversary. So there's a massive difference here. And you've got, I see Politico's Olivia Beavers is tweeting today about how Republicans and Democrats on the Hill are responding to this. She says, one well-connected Republican tells me they are hearing from offices that this TikTok campaign is, quote, backfiring. It's incensing members who are on the fence. They're now leaning towards voting for Gallagher's bill, this bill to force the divestiture. And meanwhile, she also says a senior House Democrat staffer says this is also having a backfire effect with their office as they get lit up with TikTok-driven calls. And it brings me to the Energy and Commerce Committee today, where they had a vote on this bill. It was 50-0. It passed unanimously. So somehow, I guess bipartisanship is breaking out at the moment thanks to pressure from China?
China, and again, I think it's, to your point, it's not just from China. It's from this bizarre tactic of enslaving American children to call their representatives when they then threaten to kill themselves or their member of Congress. But here's, I want to flash back to about a year ago when the same Energy and Commerce Committee was putting forward, in essence, more of an actual ban on TikTok, and it passed with broad bipartisan support. But then you would see basically Democrats killed it. TikTok, remember, they flooded the Hill with TikTok influencers who said that, they need the app to continue. And then Democrats folded like a house of cards on this. Yes. And then since then, Joe Biden has joined TikTok on his presidential campaign, even though his own administration says that this is a direct threat to national security. So I don't want to count the chickens before they hatch here, but I do think that you're right to note that the way in which this tactic has gone down today has been a complete disaster. It's alienated, obviously, Republicans, and I think you're right, it has also alienated Democrats. If you want someone in Congress to do something for you, you probably shouldn't threaten to murder them.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, if there's any members of Congress or congressional staffers who are listening to this, please release the audio, censor the name of the kid. But I want to hear some of this audio of these kids calling into Capitol Hill and what they're saying to these members of Congress, because this sounds totally insane to me. That this is even happening, and yet here we are. And as you point out, Biden and these Democrats have folded under this Chinese pressure in the past because they, for whatever reason, whether they're sucking up to China or they see this as their vehicle to get votes from young people. Do you think it's a high probability that if this bill were to land on Biden's desk that he'd veto it?
Interestingly, Biden has actually said that he would sign this bill. Now, will he remember that he said that? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. One way that I thought was interesting that one of the Republicans on the China Select Committee was handling these calls is Ashley Hinson from Iowa. She decided, you know what? I'm just going to answer these calls myself. And when she was telling me she was going to do this, I said, just so you know, this is before I learned about the death threats. I said, just so you know, kids are calling in saying, Congresswoman Hinson, I'm going to kill myself. How are you going to handle that? And she said, look, I'm a mom of young kids. My kids are not allowed to use TikTok. But the first thing I'm doing in that situation is saying, okay, can I please speak to your parents? I want to understand what's going on here, that, you feel like the divestiture of Chinese ownership would make you want to kill yourself. And another instance I saw also of how this has been somewhat backfiring is a different House office told me they're answering these calls. These children don't know anything. They're saying, hi, where do I, this 10-year-old in Minnesota, where do I vote to preserve TikTok? And which says to me we have a big civics education crisis in this country as well, if they think that that's how this works. But one of the officers told me they decided, you know what? We're going to explain why we're doing this. We're going to take these calls seriously. And they said that some of the kids, I'm not going to pretend it was all of them, said, whoa, we did not know any of this, and we don't want China spying on all of our data over here. So whether it's the death threats and suicide threats or the actual substance of when these congressional staff have been talking with these kids, it's been a complete disaster for TikTok. I don't know whoever thought that this was a good idea. I'm not aware of on a federal level campaigns like this, that an app is directing you to contact your elected official. I've seen local campaigns like this that Uber and Lyft have done to counter local taxi lobbies, trying to prevent them from going to the airport. But on a federal level, I don't think I've seen anything like this ever before. And it has been a complete nightmare for TikTok.
Yeah. Sometimes like television channels and contract disputes will be like, call your cable provider now. Tell them you want to keep our channel. That's a little different than, call your member of Congress and tell them, don't ban TikTok. It's a lie. It's just a complete lie. And it's directed by, again, the communists in China. The other piece here for people to remember is if you're wondering why there's so much massive delusion and mental illness going on among young people who are affirmed in some of this mental illness rather than helped. A lot of this is TikTok. TikTok is driving it. The gender confusion, all of that stuff, that's coming straight. It's being pipelined straight to your kid through this app, again, at the direction of the Chinese communists who are really eating this up. They love this because of all of the division it creates here in the United States.
To really underscore the point you're making here is, you see on TV, call your member of Congress and do this. I don't have TikTok because I don't want China spying on me. But my understanding is for a lot of the people who have been using it, you are required to call your congressman before you can log on and use the app as you normally do.
Wow.
It is a level of pressure on their users. I've heard conflicting things on this. Again, I'm not going to download it and check it out myself. But to the bigger point, TikTok is going all out to stop this. I think they realize that for the CCP ownership, the writing would be on the wall if this thing actually becomes law, which, again, I don't want to count our chickens here, but it's looking like all of a sudden this came together very quickly. It's looking like that may be what happens.
And it seems that the reason this is such a big deal for China is it's the single biggest psychological operation they have on the planet. And they're watching as this weapon may leave their hands soon.
That's exactly correct. And that's why I think they are going so all out. They sent everyone who has it a push notification saying the U.S. government is trying to ban TikTok. Then when you open it, it then prompts you to enter in your zip code so you can call your member of Congress. And then what I'm not entirely positive about, though, is that that's a requirement to use the app like you normally would. And, my takeaway on all of this stuff is just use Instagram Reels. There's no material difference in, the way the video editing and all of that happens, whether it's on TikTok or on Instagram. But when you're on Instagram, Xi Jinping isn't getting a backdoor entrance to your entire phone.
Now, obviously, this is already having a backfiring effect, but members of Congress, when this all kind of falls out of the headlines, members of Congress start doing really stupid things, and including keeping this around. So is it your view, Matt Foldi, that now the adults should start placing pressure on members of Congress to actually do the right thing here?
Listen, I think that adults, kids, teenagers, this threatens everyone if China has personalized blackmail folders on every American. So it doesn't matter how old you are. Yes, you should obviously place pressure on Congress, not only with TikTok, but with anything like this where Chinese intervention is happening in our country. We should simply not allow that because, again, TikTok is banned in China. Why are they banning it? Maybe all of the things that we've discussed about their algorithms brainwashing kids into eating disorders and things like that. If a TikTok ban is good enough for the CCP, I think it's good enough for the US of A.
Right, because it's a weapon of mass delusion. That's what we're dealing with here. Thank you very much, Matthew Foldi, for all of your excellent reporting, as always. Good to talk to you today, sir.
Hey, a pleasure as always, Vince. Talk to you soon.
Right. I don't know if you have kids, but they might like Harry Potter. They like the Harry Potter books at all? Written by J.K. Rowling, who is, I think J.K. Rowling kind of a lifelong lefty feminist person. But she the one sin that she's made is she thinks women are a real category. And she says men can't be women. Oh, boy, the left hates her for this. I thought you were one of us, they scream. She's like, I'm a woman, and a man can't be a woman, so therefore she is a villain in the left's tale. And that led to these headlines today. David Hookstead over at Outkick, the great David Hookstead, writing today that J.K. Rowling has been reported to the police over pronouns. There is a fella who calls himself India Willoughby, a man claiming to be a woman, revealed in an interview recently with Byline TV that the police were contacted because Rowling refuses to call him a woman, according to Deadline. In fact, here's the interview where Mr. India says and by the way, he's done a really good job making his voice sound female. So you're going to hear this and be like, that does actually sound like a woman. It turns out it's not a woman. It's a scam.
J.K. Rowling has definitely committed a crime. I'm legally a woman. She knows I'm a woman, and she calls me a man. It's a protected characteristic, and that is a breach of both the Equalities Act and the Gender Recognition Act. She's tweeted that out to 14 million followers.
You're not allowed to tell the truth to that many people.
Check out the accounts that have been responding to me on the back of that, her trigger. It's absolutely disgusting, putrid, some of the worst abuse I've ever seen on social media. And I know I'm at the center of it, and I might be a little bit biased.
Well, what are you going to do about this?
What am I going to do about it? Well, I've been to the police, and I've reported it as an issue. I contacted Northumbria Constabulary yesterday.
Northumbria Constabulary? Constable?
So you reported J.K. Rowling
I have reported J.K. Rowling to the police for what she said, which...
By the way, this is becoming more and more normal in the West, just broadly. That's obviously, the Brits are a couple years ahead of us in terms of the craziness, but not that far ahead.
I don't know if that's going to be treated as a hate crime, malicious communications, but it's a cut and dried offence as far as I'm concerned. And at the end of the day, it is a hate crime.
Oh my gosh, it's actually ridiculous is what it is. I see J.K. Rowling's all over Twitter today saying bring it. And she's standing up for what she believes, and good for her. I mean, she's definitely on the side of normalcy there. She came up with an entire world of witches and wizards and all sorts of fantasy. But when it comes to reality, she's not giving in on this idea that men can be women. And again, good for her. Hey, the great one, Mark Levin, is up next here on WMAL. I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say leading up to Joe Biden's final State of the Union address. I will be back with you tomorrow with an assessment of all of it. Stay with WMAL.